Now, I mean, I can really live all the way authentically in my truth as someone who is like living with HIV and someone who is a survivor of abuse and someone who is engaged in a recovery from compulsivity and like a whole deluge of areas. So it's nice just to be able to be like open and authentic about like the path that I've taken to be here. And that I definitely am the person that you know and love from Queer Eye, but I'm also someone who has like other things going on that I think are really important to talk about. It's nerve-wracking, you know, I wrote about that a lot about in the book of just wondering like, you know, I wonder if people would still love me as much if they knew like what my whole story was. And so often I think a lot of times I have felt almost like a sense of guilt for like having fun or having like recovery or being able to like get to where I've gotten, like even before Queer Eye, just feeling like there are just so many people that like didn't have an opportunity to get to where I've gotten, even just as far as like living like prior to becoming famous, but just because of like when they were born and what their relationship was in the HIV/AIDS crisis and like their relationship to time. Like, you know, if I would have been born like 10, 20 years earlier, like I don't think I would be here. Giving justice to the people and giving voice to people that are living with HIV, giving voice to people that don't get to be here any longer because of HIV and all the inadequacies and racism and homophobia that caused us to lose a whole generation of people, and still is disproportionately affecting people of color and marginalized communities. I think sometimes I was like, I shouldn't be having like so much fun all the time. Like I need to be talking about these other aspects that affect my life like very deeply that you wouldn't really see on Queer Eye, but I needed to be able to talk about all of those things together. Like I'd been saying like, oh, I'm like a cisgendered gay man. I've been in interviews and I feel like I remember, you know, saying that, and at some point I was like, I don't know. And then prior to that, like when I started going back and forth between New York and LA, I got just much more immersed in like a gorgeous, vibrant LGBTQ community that exists in New York that I didn't really have the same sort of access to in Los Angeles. And that's when I started realizing like, okay, like there is more than a binary for me to like subscribe or in this case like unsubscribe from. As Queer Eye started getting its success and I kept dressing how I've always kind of dressed and presenting how I've always kind of presented, people just started asking me a lot, like, what are your pronouns? Like, you know, asking me how I identified. And I think when I started having a lot of kids asking me, I was like, oh, like, I don't think I have ever really identified as a man. I think I just thought that that was my only choice. My main takeaway I think I want to take from the book is that like, essentially, well, there's two. One is that like we all have shame and like we all have that feeling of like if I really let you all the way in and really showed you all of who I am, like you would not love me the same anymore. You wouldn't think of me the same as what you used to. So that's like the one thing that like actually vulnerability can be really is strong and beautiful and necessary. The other thing is that like essentially, you know, as far as like the HIV and the sexual abuse and all of these things go and the compulsivity, it's like so many of the worst things that I ever thought could happen to me happened to me. Like as a small kid, when I thought about like people getting HIV when I was a little kid in the early 90s, like top 3 worst things that I could ever have imagined happening to me. Like becoming someone who was like addicted to drugs, that's like not what you want to have happen. Having my stepdad, you know, go the way he did, like all really awful things that happened in such short succession of time to me. And at the end of the day, like all of these worst case scenario things that happened ended up creating the conditions for me to have like the most fulfilled, integrated life that I still can't even believe I get to call my own. So it's like sometimes I just would never put the universe in a box. Like I never ever thought that I would be here or that my life would be as successful and as amazing as it is like at this point. And really the book is like a very joyful story, much more joyful than I think you would necessarily think that it was based off of like a lot of the headlines that have like accompanied it. So I want people to take away that it's actually just like a really joyful story and that shame is normal.